back to church.
Thank you for collecting those statements. On the count of three, 1, 2, 3.
My name is Mauricio Schiavenin. I was born in Brazil, but now I live here in the United States. I want to start, my wife and I, we will complete 11 years of marriage in February of next year. It's a long time, and I'm very proud of it. And during this period, my wife, she always told me to do something that I actually never really cared about. She loves perfumes, but I am satisfied with my neuter smell. I don't like perfume. But because I care about her, I bought a perfume. And then when the perfume arrived in our mailbox, I got it, and then I went inside and I told my wife, look, it's here. Let's see. What do you think about it? And then I put it on, and I told her, smell it. And then she smelled it, and she smelled it. And she said, it's smelling anything. And then I did the same, and she was right. It was not smelling anything. And then I looked at the flask, and it was written there, this is not a genuine perfume. This is a replica of the bottle of the perfume. What was inside was anything but a perfume. And I was happy because I could keep my neuter smell. But the next day, my wife broke my happiness, and she bought another perfume for me. The story for today, it's about a perfume. It's in Matthew chapter 26. But it's about a very important perfume. It's about the anointment of Jesus. The chapter 26 of Matthew, it's a landmark in the book because it's the end of Jesus' ministry and it's the beginning of the Passion Week. And this same story we can find in Mark, in John, and we have a similar story in Luke as well. So as you open your Bible in Matthew chapter 26, you can see that in the first 5 verses, we see Jesus talking to his disciples about his upcoming crucifixion. And at the same time, we see the leaders of the temple plotting how they would kill Jesus. So it's in this context that the story of the anointment of Jesus comes along. Verse 6. And when Jesus was in Bethany, at the house of Simon the leper. Bethany was a small village located approximately 2 miles away from Jerusalem. And since it was Passover time, it's believed that many people were coming to Jerusalem for the festival. So many of these people could not stay in Jerusalem, so they used to stay in these villages around the city. And Jesus happened to know somebody who Matthew calls Simon the leper, who lived in Bethany, in one of these villages. And that's where Jesus and his disciples stayed during that week. Matthew doesn't tell us much about who Simon was. He just says Simon the leper. So we can assume that this Simon was somebody who used to have leprosy, and Jesus healed him, and now he was a follower of Jesus. And Jesus doesn't say any words of appreciation, at least we don't see anything here in Matthew, to this man. But there is another character in this story that takes over from here. It's in verse 7. A woman came to him, having an alabaster flask of very costly fragrant oil, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. Matthew doesn't tell us the name of this woman, but when we go to John tells us that it's Mary, the sister of Lazarus and the sister of Martha. But maybe Matthew doesn't tell us here her name because more important than her name is what she did for Jesus. And the description of Matthew, he says that she had this alabaster flask. And usually alabaster flasks in the Jewish custom, they were kind of transparent and they had a resemblance of marble. And through that flask, you could see that green oil, a fragrant oil. And Matthew says here that that oil was not any kind of oil, it was a very costly oil. In the book of Mark, he says that this oil was nard, and nard was imported from India to the Palestine area. So we know that it was a very costly. And Mark also says that that oil was worth 300 denarii, which was equivalent to 1 year's wage of a regular labor. Here in the state of Michigan, the minimum wage for labor is about $8 an hour. So we are talking about, in a day, $64. In a week, we are talking about $320. In a month, we are talking about $1,260. And in a year, we are talking about $15,380. What do you think if my wife or your husband asks for a perfume of $15,380? Very expensive perfume. And that's what that woman did. She gave it all to Jesus. So the first lesson that we can learn from this story is that that woman, she gave the best thing that she had to Jesus. A few years ago, I had to take that decision. I was planning to do something else with my life, with my career. But then I decided to come here to the seminary to give my life, my best to Jesus. And you all have done the same. That's why you're here today, studying the seminary. And something interesting happened right after, verse 8. But when his disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, "Why this waste?" We're not sure if they said it that out loud, but if they did, most likely that woman was very ashamed for her action, especially because it came from such important people, the disciple of Jesus. But even if they did not have said that out loud, even if they had just murmured, the point here is that there are always people who will criticize those who have decided to give their best to Jesus. Maybe you have that might be your situation. Maybe you have a relative, father, mother, sister, brother, maybe a friend who have been telling you that being here in the seminary is a waste of your time, is a waste of what you're doing with your life. In verse 9, then it says, "For this fragrant oil might have been sold for much and given to the poor." The disciples, besides telling that that was a waste, they justified. They said, look, this is a waste because what this oil, it could have been sold and the money could have been used for the poor. Apparently, it was a beautiful thing, especially because Jesus himself, he taught his disciples that they had to help the poor. A few chapters ago, he talks about the young ruler, and he told him, sell everything you have and give it to the poor. So it's something genuine, their concern, helping the poor. And this sometimes is the kind of argument that people who criticize the fact that you are giving your best to Jesus, they use. They say, look, you could have been doing something else with your life. I have a brother who, for the last year, he has been sending me emails, messages. He works for a construction company in Maryland, and he is paid monthly a salary and a commission, and he gets 10% of his sales. Last month, for example, he sent me his sales report, and he sold $400,000 in service. That means he got $40,000 in a month. And he said that next year he wants to open his own company. And he is thinking to put me as the financial manager of the company because I am the only person he can trust. In other words, he's saying to me, I can give you much more than what you're doing there. And besides that, look at your situation now. Look the limitations that you're giving to yourself and to your family. You're living in Michigan, the land of snow, and you're passing sometimes difficulties. I can give you much more to help the poor, your kids. That's the kind of argument. But then we go to verse 10, and the scenario changes. Verse 10 says, "But when Jesus was aware of it, he said to them, 'Why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a good work for me.'" Every time somebody criticizes you because you're doing your best for Jesus, here you can know that Jesus stands to defend you. That Jesus stands from his seat because he appreciates what you are doing. And he says here, that's what he said for the woman. For you have what you are doing, for what she has done is a good work. This word good in Greek is kalon. And the original of this word is kalos. which means beautiful. So Jesus is not just saying that it's a good work, but it's a beautiful work, what you're doing. So it's much more special. And then we go to verse 11. For you have the poor with you always, but me you do not have always. Here Jesus is trying to explain to his disciples that it's not that he doesn't care about the poor. Of course he cares, and he has taught his disciples to care about the poor. But there is something more important, a priority at this moment that they cannot see. And what is that? Verse 12. For in pouring this fragrant oil on my body, she did it for my burial. For many times, Jesus has tried to tell his disciples that he is about to die. A few verses ago, in verse 2, Jesus told them, I will be crucified. But in the mind of his disciples, they are still thinking that Jesus would become their king. Their king that would take them out of the oppression of the Roman Empire, that will lead Israel to a new government. They are not understanding what Jesus is about to face, his death. But there is somebody in that room who understood that. There is somebody in that room who understood that in a few days, something very special would happen. A fulfillment of a prophecy, something that was very crucial in the great plan of salvation, the death of Jesus. There was only one person who understood that in that room. And Jesus was trying to convey that to his disciples. And then that's why he said, for in pouring this fragrant oil on my body, she did it on my burial. There was an act of faith from that woman, because she prepared Jesus for burial, anointing him before Jesus went to burial. Today, we live in a time which we are close to another important event in the story of the plan of salvation. It's the second coming of Christ. And we are also, like that woman, doing the best, doing to Jesus, giving to Jesus the best that we have in order to do our part in the fulfillment of this prophecy as well. So what Jesus is trying to tell us here is what you're doing, giving your best here to him, it's not a waste. It's a good work. And it's also a rewarding work. And we'll see now why. Verse 13. Assuredly, I say to you, whenever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as memorial to her. The basic fact that her story is here in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is a proof that this promise of Jesus to that woman was fulfilled. The fact that today we're preaching about her fulfills the fact that this promise that he gave to her. And Jesus has a promise to you and to me today, for those who are giving their best to him. After this event, we know what happened. Jesus is betrayed, he's taken, and he's killed. But on chapter 28, two chapters later, we see that Jesus raises from the grave. And then he meets again his disciples. And then he tells him these words in chapter 28, verse 19. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations. Baptize them in the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. And lo, and here comes the promise that he has for you and for me, those who are doing the best for him. I am with you always, even to the end of the ages. I believe we are living in the end of the ages. And I believe that Jesus is with us as we work for him. Is there anything else that you want much more than the presence of Jesus in your life?